Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic and incredible episode for you guys today, just as we always do. And so I'm going to jump right into it. We're not beginning with questions from the cognitive elite. I want to discuss a topic that I'm seeing a lot of debate around, and no, it's nothing to do with the United Healthcare CEO slaying socialism or the insane people in my mentions about the insane misanthropes. In my mentions, we're going to be discussing something that is broader scale, much more political, and on the bigger topic, rather than what's going on in my mentions. Over the last weekend, I had people really upset about me saying socialism sucks, and then me saying we shouldn't be misanthropes. Like people are like, no, we are going to be nihilists. But we're gonna have an article tomorrow about the going Joker mode and what that means for the country. But today I'm going to discuss the bigger topic of what Trump is going to do on immigration with his term, or what he might possibly do. I think it's worth discussing that. I've brought this up in the past episodes and talked about this in articles. But now that he's president and we're getting a better sense of what he might actually do, it's worth discussing that in detail. And also assessing whether it's going to live up to our expectations or not, and what this means for the Trump era and what the American people actually want. Because already there's a lot of people who are wanting to, give up on Trump and say we were betrayed and this is horrible. We need start a third party. I don't know what these people generally come up with. So we're going to look at the issue that I think a lot of people centered their focus on for Trump and why that mattered. So I'm going to go into this topic. First off, when I'm going to bring up immigration. Immigration was one of the main things that got Trump elected. But it was not the only thing that got Trump elected, which in my crazy weekend of mentions, people were having a tough time understanding that when I said, well, also Americans voted for Trump because they were unhappy with the economy. They were unhappy with inflation. They were also equally unhappy with immigration. These were big factors. And then people were like, oh, no one voted for Trump because of inflation. And I don't know what to say to people like that. But, internet creates their own fantasy lands for this stuff. Any case, immigration was very important. It's what people voted for him. Now, what specifically that people vote for Trump on immigration? And it's worth remembering it is the unprecedented level of illegal immigration that made people vote for Trump. Now, whether this signals a sign of a rejection of mass immigration itself remains to be determined. But what made people turn sour on immigration was the fact that we were allowing, 3 million illegals, roughly 3 million illegals every year into this country. And then they'd all come here and they were not working. They were forming gangs. They were depleting the social services of many cities and states. And they were a major nuisance for Americans across the country because no part of this country was immune from migrants. Is that you could be in rural North Dakota and somehow you'd have migrants there. This is happening all throughout Alabama, where all these places that had, were lily white essentially, and then they've got like 1,000 Haitians there. You can also see that in Springfield, where, all these thousands of Haitians practically demographically replaced the town. Now they're moving out. So people felt that before, that immigration obviously been making effect for many years in the country. I mean, you'd have to be blind to not notice it. But under Biden, it became, ever present. They, go about the street, generally, maybe there'd be a few Mexicans that were there now that weren't there before, or really Guatemalans or Central Americans. But that would be it. But then they would, go. Well, in the South, they're not walking. They're driving around town. And now they see, what the hell? There's an entire little Port-au-Prince in my town. Where did the hell this happen? And so people were very upset about this across the country. And they're they're looking at the border and they're seeing tens and thousands of people cross every month. And they're like, we need to get a handle on this. And so the thing to keep in mind about this is that it's still primarily for Americans about illegal immigration. We would like it to be about legal immigration as well, or even more importantly, legal immigration. For the average American, it is about illegal immigration. Now, it's a lot murkier in that territory because these illegals that are coming in sort of get a quasi legal status because they're like, oh, we're applying for asylum. And they're like, oh, okay, well, here's your court date and you can hang out in this country while we process it in 6 years. And so they have a sort of quasi legal status here. It's not, shouldn't be any legal status, but, they can claim, oh, I'm an asylum seeker. I'm not an illegal immigrant. And that's what a lot of these guys were there. So it's become murkier for what they are. And the government was, pledging, unless you commit a serious crime, which had to be like aggravated rape or murder or something of that sort, you're not going to be deported. So they're allowed here. So it became a murkier territory for them. But with Americans, it is illegal immigration that it strikes in their mind. Now, that has prompted them to have, for a larger number of Americans to want immigration reduced, unlike in the years under Trump, where there was this front lash towards Trump's policies, and it encouraged more Americans think we need more immigrants, and actually we need to abolish ICE and end enforcement. I don't think that was a majority of Americans, but there was this sentiment that was percolating among Americans on that. With under Biden, there's now more Americans who want immigration restricted overall, but it's still primarily illegal immigration. So you have to keep this in mind when you see, these rumblings about Trump or people involved who are wanting to increase legal immigration, because Elon Musk had a tweet over the weekend saying, we need to make it easier for illegal immigrants to come here. And obviously that raised eyebrows among the right. And some people are like, they're already betraying our promises. But you have to realize is that the position, even though Trump definitely went into legal immigration, probably a lot more so than maybe some of his supporters or his allies like Elon Musk, for a lot of the people who voted for him, it's simply a matter of illegal immigration. Now, considering illegal immigration is far higher than legal immigration among in the Biden years, because we got over 10 million illegals and we got under 4 million legals from give or take something of that sort. So it was nearly 15 million migrants here. I think even more than that came under Biden. And so there's the real issue for most Americans, and I don't think this is what we would quite want them to be, but it's illegal immigration. So I want to establish that. Now, for us, we clearly know about the legal immigration problems. We know that, these Indian H-1B visas are taking high-skilled jobs that Americans want. We also know that it's a bigger problem with some of these illegal migrants because they're staying here and have a bigger ability to change their culture than a lot of these illegal seasonal workers who, a lot of them will just go back on their own, even though it's a different now with the Biden waves because, the Venezuelans do not want to go back home. Neither do the Nicaraguans or the Haitians. None of them are going back home. But for traditionally more Mexican and other Central American countries, a little bit different with Nicaragua, there were plans that they might go back. But with legal immigrants, they're here. And they're here to stay to change the culture. And it's also presents a problem when they're high skilled, high IQ, and then they're able to get their kids into good colleges, and then they eventually change the culture, which for, illegal Hispanic laborers, they just kind of stay in another corner. They become another ghetto population, which there are problems with that, and that we're paying for them and subsidizing them, but they don't present quite the cultural threat that legal migrants do. Having a bunch of Indians who are now in control of Silicon Valley is a much bigger problem than seasonal farm workers. That's much more impactful on the country. So there's that. But that's hard to communicate to a lot of Americans. I think it's easier to communicate with us, but it's harder to communicate to Americans because then they're like, well, they're working hard and they're paying taxes. We love entrepreneurs. We love that Vivek guy. He's really smart. And so they all it's much harder to communicate this stuff to normal Americans, which it's easier to present the problem of illegal immigrants. It's like, look, they're taking up welfare. They're taking up jobs, even though some of the jobs, maybe the jobs are taking up for Black Americans, not so much white Americans. Oh, and they're bringing crime, they're bringing drugs, they're raping people, as Trump famously said. You're not quite having that with the Indian H-1Bs and a lot of the Asian migrants, the more permanent migrants. But it's hard to illustrate this because a lot of the Americans, when they operate on voting, they're operating on materialist or utilitarian concerns. It's like, what is impacting my taxes? What's impacting my economic position or my economic status? It's these type of problems. Is this making my neighborhood more or less safe? It's these very, and I'm not using this as a negative. I'm just trying to say that it's not motivated by these type of ideals where it's like, oh, I'm voting for this because I'm worried that the fundamental character or racial character of America is being changed. So this is more something part of the dissident right than the broader Trump voting demographic. Their primary concerns are like illegal immigrants, or they're bringing crime, they're bringing drugs, they're taking welfare, they're taking up all these social services, they're forming gangs, there's something dangerous about them. Which I think is perfectly legitimate. I'm not saying that's just common sense to have a problem with them, and to recognize that's good, because in the past they'd be like, oh, illegal immigrants aren't committing any crime. Now they're realizing, oh, actually they are bringing a bunch of crime and a bunch of drugs, and we should not have them in our country. So that's progress, but at the same time, the bigger issues, civilizational issues, they don't have the same impact with the Americans. I've seen takes of saying like, the election, the 2024 election was a battle between seeing the America as a people versus America as an idea. And I don't think that was quite it, even though I wish that was the case. I don't want to go as far to say that, because I think only a very small portion of the Trump voters were even intending that. Now, they do think that a lot of these problems, threaten America, are not good for America, is that we have all these illegal immigrants. That's not good for our country and our country's future. But in terms of the matter of how we view it as like, oh, we're no longer going to be a people because of illegal immigrants, that's not something reaching the people. And I think that for them, this type of stuff flies over their head. And it also, in some fact, they could be like, well, that's already happened through the slow boil of mass immigration over 60 years, nearly 60 years. And so, they just wake up one day and that's the country. And so a lot of these, ordinary boomers and stuff, they still like, well, as long as the immigrant pays taxes and works hard, what's wrong with him? But they don't think that that's the case with illegal immigrants. So this is one thing established about like the base and how they view this and what Trump is doing. And so the mandate Trump has is to get a control of illegal immigration and to push out illegals. Now, he does not have a mandate to increase legal immigration, which is some of his backers are wanting. That is something to clear, is that while I'm saying that a lot of the base, maybe when they think of immigration, they're not thinking of cutting the numbers of legal immigration, and a lot of them could be like, oh, we need more hard workers here. They might think that. But at the same time, there's still, if Trump does not have the political capital to like, we're actually going to increase the number of green cards. That would really upset the base, because, they don't want that either. But the primary thing is illegal immigration. He does not have a mandate to increase immigration at the same time, but it's less of a mandate to cut down on legal immigration and the way that we want. But he can do a lot with the administration. So I'm going to go over what he is likely to do. And so as with that in mind, that he has a mandate to crack down on illegal immigration, that is going to probably be his number one goal for this admin. So here's what he's going to do. He is going to significantly increase deportations. Now, whether it reaches the level of what we want for mass deportations, that is the question. They're going to try very hard for this. I mean, the first thing that they're going to have to, first thing that they're going to do is that they're going to wipe away all the Biden executive orders and policies that put handcuffs on ICE to not and dissuaded them from doing their jobs. Now they're going to be able to do their jobs. Two, they're going to come down harder in sanctuary cities to cooperate with ICE. And some of these cities are going to be more than happy to do so because unlike in the late 2010s when Trump was president, there is far less political support for sanctuary city position than there was now. Because all these cities, you are going to have so many examples of, say, Denver is like, we're not cooperating with ICE. And then some illegal immigrant rapes somebody or murders somebody. And then all the conservative media is going to be on that. And that guy is going to face a political firestorm even within his city that he's protecting illegal immigrants. Because there is not this groundswell of support for migrants like there was in the late 2010s. So sanctuary cities and states are in a much weaker position than they were in, say, 2017, 2018. That's a good thing. So he's going to put pressure on them. Third thing he needs to do is he needs to get increased funding for ICE. And I think he can do this through a budget bill. I don't think if he has a budget bill, it's not going to be subject to a filibuster. Sorry, I forgot my words. It's not going to be subject to a filibuster. So he just needs a simple majority for it. And there is a number of Democrats who will probably vote for it. Now, how many? Like 5, maybe 10. I mean, there's a lot of Democrats in competitive districts, and there's a lot of Democrats who are wanting to make themselves look moderate. Also, there's a number of Democrats who think that looking moderate is going to be good look for 2028. And there's a number of senators who want to run for office or run for the presidency in 2028. So some of these people may vote for it as well. Probably not enough to break a filibuster, but they can get it through a budget bill, as it is with the budget, and just increase. If that doesn't work, he can declare a national emergency like he did in 2019. And in that national emergency in 2019, he took money from the Defense Department and placed it into trying to get border security. He could do that again and say, we have a national security. This is a threat. We have an invasion. I'm going to take defense funding and push it towards ICE and Border Patrol and to DHS. So those are the number one priority is getting those deportation numbers up. Second is going to be increasing border security. He's going to restore Remain in Mexico. He has the power to do that. He just needs to pressure Mexico on this to allow that to happen. And so that'll keep a lot of the asylum seekers out of here. He's going to take the handcuffs off of Border Patrol so they can do their jobs. Like the Biden administration banned them from being on horses and using whips and stuff, it's more just to corral them. They weren't actually whipping them, but there was those famous pictures from 2021 where these Border Patrol guys were trying to corral these Haitian migrants, and it looked like they were whipping them. They'll be allowed to do that stuff again. There's going to be more support for border perimeters and other barriers to prevent illegal migration. That will also require more money, and so that's going to depend on how he gets that money. It's probably going to be one of his first priorities. So all that is good. And I think that there's already a message being heard by illegal migrants that it's going to be a lot harder to get to the country now under Trump, because passage through the Darien Gap, which is this jungle area, very tough to get through in Panama, and it's a lot of where the South Americans and also people are flying from like China and all over the world and Africa to go through. The numbers have significantly decreased since Trump's election, and there's already a Trump effect where people, there are some who are trying to cross at the last moment, but there's others who are realizing that it might not be worth the journey because there's going to be different policies. Is that even in now where the country would have said, oh, you're appealing for asylum? Sure, come on in. But now it's like, you're going to have to remain in Mexico for this, there's much more of a disincentive to come. So illegal migration numbers are going to come down, and even if they do start to go up, the country's going to be more prepared to send them back immediately rather than under Biden, where we're letting them all come in. So that's going to happen. Deportations. Now they're going to have to come down harder on the sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, and that's going to be a political battle. Also on the deportations, there is optics concerns over how the country will react. Now, if you have, people going into a factory and then putting them on buses and vans or whatnot, maybe, and cameras catch it, maybe the country might be repelled at this, because you have to go back to 2018 and 2019 over family separation and kids in cages. The whole country was like wanting to abolish ICE and immigration detention facilities. I'm not saying the whole country, but a lot of people were, just simply because they showed some kids in a cage. And then they're like, "Oh no, this is the worst thing ever. We have concentration camps on the southern, around our border." Now, the country is in a different mood than it was in 2018 and 2019, and also the news media is a lot weaker. They don't have the resources to send reporters there 24/7. I mean, some of them do, but there's fewer people paying attention to the news now than they were in 2018 and 2019. I bring this up all the time with sports betting, but it is such an important aspect of our country now. More people are focused on their parlays and the stats of individual receivers than they are on what's going on in the southern, what's going to be going on there. So I don't know if they're going to whip up the type of moral hysteria that they were in the late 2010s, but they could happen. So that's going to be a battle, and also how the logistics and all that. That's going to be it for the first year. But deportations are going to go up. And the fact that a lot of these illegals are going to realize, like, oh, shit, we could actually be deported at any moment. A lot of them are going to self-deport. So illegal immigration numbers are going to come down. The real question is how much they're going to come down. If Trump can get the numbers, illegal entry numbers, to under 50,000, which was about the average for his administration and for most administrations, it will signal a victory. Because under Biden, I don't think pretty much every month has been over 150,000 average. There was even a month where it was 300,000. That is insane numbers, because under Trump, where in 2019 there was a border surge, it reached, I think it was still under 150,000. I think if I remember correctly, it was like 130,000 or so that came. That was like the highest point. And for Biden, that would be a victory to have that lower number, because there was in early 2023, the numbers went down around that level, and the Biden administration was celebrating it as like a huge victory. And the numbers have been about that for the last... for a lot of this year, and the Biden administration is like, we've gotten a handle on illegal immigration. And it's like, okay, maybe so, but not to the extent the American people want. So we can have that, and it makes it easier to deport. That'll be a victory. Trump is going to significantly reduce refugee emissions and asylum emissions. They are going to tighten the rules on asylum. I think they can do this without congressional approval, but they may have to go to Congress to get this. So there will be that. They'll make it harder for people who are likely to be on welfare and government assistance to get green cards. They did this in the first term with the public charge rule, was upheld by the courts, so they can easily just implement it again, just like that on day one. That'll be good, because that will also have an effect on legal immigration. So will getting those refugee numbers down to a historic level. They were supposed to have it at the beginning of 2020. I mean, there weren't that many migrants coming because of COVID, but they set it to a historic low of 15,000. And I think under Biden it was because there were so many migrants coming here that nobody paid attention, but I think they were getting it over 100,000, that they boosted those numbers to over 100,000. So they could immediately reduce that from, to 15,000. And that would be a big win. He's also, he is talking about issuing an executive order eliminating birthright citizenship. That's going to have to go through the courts, but that's the only way we're ever going to get rid of birthright citizenship. Now, if the Supreme Court rules in favor of Trump, that is a massive, massive victory. That is on the scale of eliminating affirmative action. It might even be better than eliminating affirmative action. We will solve a lot of our illegal immigration problems and migration problems by that. I mean, no longer will we have to worry about anchor babies and them, growing up and, not even speaking the language and having no real deep connection to this country, being able to vote in our elections. That will be eliminated. And that will be just a huge, huge victory for our side if that can happen. Now, if he does issue that executive order, that we should be white-pilled. What the courts will rule on it, I'm not sure. They may say a technicality that the president can't make a decision on this, so they'll just kick it aside and saying whether birthright citizenship acknowledges the children of illegal immigrants as Americans. It depends. I mean, the broad reading of birthright citizenship from the 14th Amendment comes from the Supreme Court. It's not like Congress decided oh yes, illegal immigrants are definitely citizens, and this is a ruling. It's decisions made by the Supreme Court, so the Supreme Court should correct its errors of the past. So that is all the good things that will happen. Now, here's the things to worry about. Thing that people are a lot of going to be upset on, but they have to wait to be truly upset over, is a deal over DACA. Now, DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, was a program initiated by Barack Obama that granted nearly 700,000 illegal immigrants who were brought here as minors legal status. Trump overturned it. It's been a sort of, court said he couldn't do it, so they've been sort of in a limbo for. He repealed it in late 2017, so it's been in limbo for 7 years, but no one's really bothered with it. But there is still this desire to grant them legal status, even among a lot of Republicans. I mean, John Cornyn's been trying to make a deal on this for 7 years. At any point, it's one of my reasons that I didn't want him sitting majority leader is that this would have been his top priorities. Now, Trump has signaled that he's open to some idea. We got to do something for the Dreamers. And, that rightfully so creates worries. Now, it depends on what they do and how many Dreamers that they include in this. Because you got to go back to 2018, early 2018, to what the fight over that was at the time. And there were several bills and proposals that were issued over what to do with them. There was a really good bill proposed by Bob Goodlatte that would just simply give those 700,000 or so ones who had signed up for DACA, not all Dreamers, just the ones who had signed up for DACA. So that limits it to that number of illegal immigrants. They would get some legal status, no pathway to citizenship. In exchange, they'd get all these serious immigration reforms. So we were going to get a border wall. We're going to get cuts, eliminating the diversity visa lottery system, significant cuts and reforms to chain migration, and a mandatory e-verify. I think there was a few other things with that, but that was really good. So you have something that's already, something de facto amnesty for the Dreamers. I mean, they have not been touched. So you essentially acknowledge the situation, and then you get a bunch of serious immigration reforms. If we can get something like that, I would think it's worth the deal. They're going to stay here anyway. If it means that with these 700,000, we can push out 5 million and then significantly cut legal immigration, I think long term that's the right move. But that might not be the deal that they make. And it's also a different situation because the reason why they wanted cuts to chain migration and the diversity visa lottery system was because of terror attacks that had happened in 2017, Islamic terror attacks that had happened in New York City that were done by people who came through those programs. Everyone forgets about those terror attacks now, but that was the prompting of it. And those chain migration and diversity visa lottery are not on people's minds. So likely now it would be serious reforms to the asylum system. And maybe if they, for some reason, can't get funding for ICE and Border Patrol in a standard budget bill, they would have to go to this method. Also, the border wall would be there and mandatory e-verify would be in the system. They may throw some other illegal immigration cuts in there. It has to be a political situation over what's happening. So Trump may have to use this as his trump card, so to say, as his his idea to lure Democrats into supporting his immigration agenda. Now there are issues here with this because Democrats and some Republicans don't just want to give 600,000 or 600, 700,000 illegal immigrants legal status. They want to give the whole category of dreamers and their parents legal status, which could be, which they estimated around nearly 2 million, and it'd likely be more. It'd probably be 3 million or even more than that who would get legal status. That is what needs to be prevented. Now, this could be a terrible deal where they give the full amnesty and a pathway to citizenship to over 2 million illegals, and we don't get enough through that. Maybe we get some border wall or, some asylum reforms. Is that worth the trade-off? I would probably say no. I don't think that would be worth the trade-off. But I think Republicans are in a stronger position to advocate for keeping the number of migrants eligible for this to a minimum. And that's what we should support. But they're going to try to do some bill on this. Now, it may not come to the floor or the bill immediately gets rejected because everyone hates it, is that Democrats hate it, Republicans hate it. It also depends on the political situation and what's going on, whether illegal immigration continues to spiral out of control and there's no desire to have any amnesty, and that might play in the hands of Republicans. You have to see. They're going to try to do something on DACA. Senate is definitely going to try to work on some deal, and the point is to ensure it benefits us, not the Democrats. So it does offer the opportunity that we can get serious immigration reforms, patriotic immigration reforms that we want. We just have to ensure that that happens and we don't turn it into a mass amnesty in exchange for a pittance. So that is something to keep in mind that he might do. Now, the bad things that are going to happen, and this is coming from Elon and some of his backers, is what I'm worried about, is that they are probably going to try to increase guest worker visas. Absolutely. Pretty much every business and industry that is going to go up to Republicans and Trump is going to say, we need guest worker visas. A bad thing that might happen with the DACA bill is because I think anything immigration related, if they have to have, a filibuster proof majority to pass it, they're going to put everything into that. And Republicans may advocate for increased guest worker visas to please the Chamber of Commerce and the business lobbies. And even this is what Elon Musk wants. So they might do that. What visas and others, that remains to be seen, but that is not a good thing. Now, if it comes with with birthright citizenship eliminated, then and other serious immigration reforms that ensure these people are not going to stay here permanently, it might not be terrible. But if it's increasing H-1B worker visas, that significantly harms Americans. If it's just increasing seasonal farm labor, which, they're really... a lot of people think that there's a ton of white Americans who want to pick crops. There are not. And ensures these people don't stay here permanently and their children can't get citizenship and they have to go back to wherever they came from, then it's not the worst thing in the world. But you have to keep that in mind. The other big issue is that they're going to try to increase Indian immigration. Now, that just doesn't mean they're going to increase the number of green cards. What they're going to try to do is eliminate the country caps on legal immigration. Is that under the country caps, I think it's assigned like 7%, only 7% of a nationality can have the number of green cards in a year. This has been pissing off Indians for years because there's like all these Indians who are trying to come here. So they want that country cap eliminated. And they've been trying to do this through the Fairness for High Skilled Immigrants Act and all these bills under the Trump era. It kind of went away, but Elon and some of the other tech sector definitely want this because they want more Indians here. And unfortunately, I don't know, that would have to happen through legislation. And Republicans might try to do this again. There was very little opposition towards it in 2019 and 2020. And they might try to push it through again. And if they eliminate the country caps, Indians are just going to dominate the visa allotments, and we're going to have even more Indian migration, which I think I explained earlier. It's very bad, and so that's probably the worst thing that could happen, besides potentially legalizing 2 to 3 million illegals under some DACA deal. So those are the things to worry about. And this stuff is going to significantly piss off and alienate a lot of the dissident right when they're looking at this. So it's going to be tough to for a lot of the influencers to sell this and to keep them optimistic. Now, if they do not pass the Fairness for High Skilled Immigrants Act, and if the DACA deal either doesn't go through or it ends up being like the Bob Goodlatte bill of 2018, I think we can still be pretty optimistic. And maybe even if they do increase guest workers, but it comes at the same time that birthright citizenship is eliminated and there's significant reforms to guest workers to ensure that they do not stay here permanently and they're just working here and then they go back to their home country, then it's not that big of a deal. But I think also the negative is that some people are going to be wanting like a RAISE Act, which the RAISE Act was something introduced during the Trump years, which it cut legal immigration in half. I don't think you're going to have legal immigration cut by that significant amount under Trump. It's mostly going to happen through executive orders and executive action, which it will make it harder for, immigrants likely to come who are going to likely be on government assistance to come here. It may deny government assistance to them. So there will be a slack, and there's going to be fewer refugees and asylum seekers getting into the country. So there is going to be a decrease in legal immigration, but I don't think to the extent that we would want. And the real question is how much mass deportations we're going to get and how that plays out in the next year. There's a lot of variables there. It's like, how will the country react negatively to the optics of seeing these people rounded up? Will businesses be crying to high heaven that they no longer have like workers, and this creates pressure on Republican lawmakers, and then it sours them on this? Will, those are the type of matters that were there. Are the courts going to rule against the Trump administration and in favor of sanctuary jurisdictions? How much backbone will these sanctuary jurisdictions will have to pressure from the Trump campaign, or not the Trump campaign, the Trump administration? And how much will the courts rule against them when the Trump administration tries to cut funding from them as a way of pressuring them into cooperating with ICE? All these things remain to be determined, but they will increase deportations. Illegal immigration will decrease. It's a matter of how much. And at this point, we're going to have to see how this plays out in the next year or so. I mean, mainstream media is trying to poo-poo it and saying they're not going to have much of the mass deportations, but we might not even need it. There might just be a mass self-deportation from them knowing that they're going to have benefits, illegals knowing there's going to have benefits denied to them. It's going to be much easier to deport them, and it's going to be much harder to hire them through mandatory E-Verify and other things that could be passed under Trump. So this is giving a preview of what the Trump administration is. And also going back to the point is you guys got to remember is that the people who voted for Trump didn't necessarily vote for Trump for dissident right reasons. And a lot of these people, the illegal immigration, because it intersects so much now with the illegal immigration that there's really no clear dividing line between the two. And it creates just that the country is much more anti-immigration. But then when you see the country, if they see illegal immigration go down significantly and they see the economy booming, but there isn't that as much done to illegal immigration as the dissident right would want, but the general public is very happy with this and Fox News viewers are very happy with this, there could be that disconnect between the online right and the offline right that encourages people to be alienated from Trump or mainstream politics. So all these things have to be kept in mind, and we'll keep an eye on it through the first year. And I think a huge difference between now and 2017 is that Trump is going in with his primary mandate being immigration. As I said, a lot of people voted for him for a variety of reasons, but immigration is the primary mandate. He has to do something about this his first term. This will be his focus. He will not be sidetracked by trying to overturn Obamacare and wasting all his political capital on that. The large share of his political capital is going to be dedicated to solving illegal immigration. And this is what we're going to see him get on the ground, be on the ground running with this, and there's going to be a lot less opposition towards his ideas than there were when he first got there. I mean, there were, these mass protests over the travel ban, on his second day in office. As he issued that in his first day or his first week, I forget the timeline, but it was like in the first week there was these mass protests, and they're like, he's trying to implement his Muslim ban. But now if he did that, no one would give a shit, practically. So he probably will do that travel ban too. That's another positive. I forgot that. But so that's what we're going to see in the administration. And that's what we're going to keep an eye on. Now we're going to go to the Cognitive Elite questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Cognitive Elite option at highly respected Substack. And just for less than $16 a month, you can get the power to ask me as many questions and suggest as many guests and topics as you want. And only way you need to do that is just to sign up for the founding member option at highly respected Substack. And that's at highly-respected.com. And make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements and the mailbag while you're there. People are really enjoying those episodes that we have. So we're going to jump right into it. So I will begin the questions with questions on the assassination. We've got two. We've got one from Mr. M. We're going to call him Mr. M. He hasn't given me a pseudonym, but I'm just going to call him Mr. M. He said, "Hey Scott, even though people are probably getting sick of hearing about it, I have a question related to the CEO assassination. It's well known that a lot of people in the online far right come from former Ron Paul or libertarian circles, but in my experience, another not insignificant faction are former leftists or even Bernie era progressives who became red pill primarily on race. Do you find this to be true, and do you think it helps explain the variation in responses to the assassination of the healthcare CEO?" And from K-Max, we have Scott. One school of thought on dissident right people who say the CEO shooting was not bad for white people in general is because the media often makes poor and working class whites targets in their hate of whitey scheme. Magical people are seen as the rich elites bioweapons against white people as part of their divide and conquer strategy. The media does not say go after Bill Gates or Brian Thompson types, but instead go after the white guy at your school for having all of this white privilege and being your white oppressor. For once, in this case of the rich guy got targeted by his own rules. Your view of this, Scott? Well, I'm going to answer K-Max's first. First off, Luigi Mangione was an admirer of Bill Gates. I don't know about this with the Brian Thompson. No, I think it's stupid. I don't like there's this false notion among the dissident right that like whites are like, they can't decide whether like working class people are making six figures and are able to afford Bugattis and live much better than white collar, or they're all starving to death. It's like, because they'll at one point be like, oh, go to trades, you'll make six figures. And then it's like, no plumber can eat. He is starving to death. And so they have this like idea that like all the whites are suffering and living under unprecedented levels of poverty, and they're not. I mean, most of the whites have a degree of financial stability. They have something to lose. That is always something I want to point out, is that our constituency has something to lose. The people who don't have anything to lose are kind of more the online maniacs. So they identify with any other maniac. They are the Joker class, the people without anything. And they want to just watch the world burn. And so anyone who helps them along, they do that. And then they'll just kind of make up these reasons, is that this is a white working class. Luigi Mangione came from a wealthier family than Brian Thompson, and reacting against the white race traders of Brian Thompson or something. I think it was like very stupid. So no, because in the same way, the left is like also celebrating Brian Thompson's death because he was a rich white guy, and it's that he has white privilege, even though the guy who killed him also had white privilege. There's still that role playing into that. I think it's just the dissident right wanting to read in some online types are running to read in their nihilism into this matter. Now to the second question from Mr. M. Bernie on leftists getting into this stuff. No, a lot of the former leftists did get into this stuff. I one time had a Cognitive Elite member who was a former leftist. He was very brief because he sent his one question was just insulting me and calling me a a homosexual for attacking the Black Panthers and stuff, and he had this long like paragraph on like, I'm a former leftist and the Black Panthers were awesome and we need a revolutionary group just like this for whites, and anyone who criticizes the Black Panthers is a race traitor. And I was like, I don't know if this makes much sense. But there's a lot of those types who come into this stuff who are former leftists, who are looking for a purpose. I think for a lot of these guys, they were just teenagers or they were like 18 or something. They hadn't really thought through these things very well. And then they just adopted a new thing. The real cruxes of it is like whether they have become a stable individual in that meantime, or if they're just trying to find an ideology to vent their frustrations. Now, this is like very clear that people have a lot to be frustrated about or be upset about. So it's not so much like, oh, if you're upset over anything, there's something wrong with you. I'm not saying that. I'm just simply saying a lot of these people just, whatever ideology will make them feel like they're going to gain power and can power trip, they're going to be for. And so maybe in 2016 it was Bernie. Now it's more Trump. I think some of the people who actually did vote for Bernie are more settled with just being pro-Trump and not going full into like Wignattery, I guess. But some of the libertarians are. But a lot of libertarians, they still have that, even though they've now adopted a more collectivist or vision, they still have that hyper individualism a part of it, and the disagreeableness that made them get into libertarianism in the first place is that they still have this attitude of like, fuck you, dad, I'm not going to clean my room. And you could see this absolutely when you see these guys like, I want a base fascist state. And then you bring up cops and they're like, every pig should die. And they get like, frothing at the mouth at the idea that you would even say anything nice about police. And still that kind of hyper individualism, like, fuck you, dad, mentality that you have. I mean, there was in the book, the Ellie Reeve book on the alt-right I recently read, they interviewed Heimbach for it. And he's like, at one point, I guess he was drunk or something. He's like, we get into this because we hate our dads. And I was like, I don't think that's true. But I think that's true for some people like Heimbach. And so they have just like a very anti-authority mindset, yet they adopt a authoritarian ideology. But they adopt that authoritarian ideology in the hope that they will have total authority rather than someone else will. And so it goes to the Joker mindset that I'm going to talk about in my article tomorrow, is that there is like this Joker class emerging in America where, there are needs. They don't really, they don't have any really stable jobs. They don't really have anything going for them in their lives. And a lot of it is like, just structural changes that are happening in America, leaving a lot of young men without anything to grasp onto. So I understand that. At the same time, these people don't really have a well-formed political ideology. They're very online, and they're into some type of subculture. Some of them become troons, or some of them go leftist, and some of them become right-wingers or whatever. But they have this mentality, and they're just looking for something to express that nihilism that they inherently have. And unfortunately, if somebody goes Joker mode, whether they drive a car through a car dealership or, they shoot a CEO, they're just going to be for it. But it's more just, there's no political message for it. It's just that they like someone going Joker mode. Like the movie The Joker, the 2019 movie, which the article will discuss at length. So those are my answers to those questions. We're going to go back to K-Max's other question that he has for today. He has another question that will be saved for the mailbag. He asked about my view on Trump's nomination of Kash Patel for the FBI. He said, I heard some journalists crying about how Patel will ruin the FBI's ability to prevent another 9/11. He said the FBI had no ability before 9/11 to centralize their information about the terrorist threat. After 9/11, the FBI got their huge office, and now we have not had another 9/11 since because of this act. Scott, your view of this BS, and also what will Patel do that we want from our political perspective? I'm fine with Patel. I think Patel is a little bit too much of the clownish element in Trump world, but it's okay. I mean, I think he's just gonna kind of announced like we've looked into the political prosecution of Trump. I don't think he's going to initiate the type of radical reform some people do. He's just going to say we're looking deep into like what they did over Russiagate and some of these other, Fox News soap operas that they've had over the years, and like why didn't they prosecute Hunter Biden and stuff. And it's mainly going to be that. I don't know what type of major reforms he's going to have. I don't think he's going to have a lot of people around him to help him in this. If he did try to have radical reforms, he's also a pragmatist. Is that he knows how government works, and he knows how to, what benefits him to secure his status. And I just think he's going to look into the politicization of the FBI and whether they were investigating Trump supporters and what they were doing over J6. That's going to be more of the stuff he does. I don't think they're going to be releasing 9/11 reports or JFK stuff. They might, but it's fine. The most important thing is that Patel will not allow the agency to go rogue and to try to coup Trump like they did in his first term. That is the most important thing about Patel, is that he's going to be a Trump loyalist. He's going to try to keep his agents in line. He's not going to allow them to go on tangents like Comey and Wray did. And they're not going to be trying to target Trump supporters either under Trump. So all that will be positive, and that's enough for us to look forward to. So that is my answer to K-Max's questions. Now we'll go to Ken. Ken asks it's an easy question. I have a question for the podcast. What's up with all the dogs nowadays? Don't get me wrong, I love dogs and I had dogs growing up. However, there's this weird thing I'm seeing now of single people, even guys, owning dogs in their early 20s when they've barely got their life together. They work in an office all day and the dog just sits there. On the weekends, they bring the dog everywhere, and it's massive pain. I can think of multiple friends I have who are functional SEC school type white guys who out of the blue adopted a dog, and whenever they visit me, they bring their dog to my apartment, and it's a major headache. But I feel like the asshole if I mention it, because who doesn't love dogs? When did this trend of single-person dog ownership start, and why will it end? Again, I feel the need to reiterate that I like dogs and think families, especially those with kids, particularly boys, should totally get dogs if they can. Well, I mean, the obvious thing is that, one, in the past, these people would have been marrying, and now they're not marrying, so they're getting a dog. Women get the dogs as surrogate children. A lot of guys are getting dogs to pick up chicks, because if you're walking the dog around and you're in a nice area with a lot of other 20-somethings, girls will approach like, oh my God, it's a dog. And so it's a great way to pick up women. And I think a lot of guys get that for that reason. It's a great way to attract women is if you have a dog, because women are obsessed with dogs. Most women are. And a lot of women in their 20s are getting it for surrogate children. So it's a lot of it that they have the kids. Now, the bringing the dogs everywhere, that's something separate. Is that we've become a society, well, it's also part that, we've become less kid friendly, but at the same time, we've become more dog friendly, and you cannot tell people to not bring their dogs. I mean, people will bring their dogs to the office. They'll bring their dogs to restaurants. They'll bring their dogs to grocery stores. And I guess they now bring their dogs to hang out. And I think that's a lot of these guys, they don't like the idea of leaving their dog alone, or they don't know what their plans are. So they're like, well, I'll bring my dog along and we'll see what happens. And now that like somebody eats your food and eats all your pretzels or whatever you have out on the thing, and you now have to deal with that. So it's just a normal. Society has forced us to be more accommodating to dogs as we become less accommodating to children, because of this nature that people are not getting married and having kids. They're instead having a dog. So there is that. I think it's not as so much a bad thing that women treat the dog as a surrogate child as their 20s, because it does prepare them for the responsibility, somewhat of the responsibility of taking care of something and having to be responsible and having that feeling for the dog. The problem is that they may just decide that, oh, I'll just have a dog instead of a child, or they won't focus on trying to find a man to give them children and stuff. And that is an issue. So when did it start? I mean, it's just been happening for the last, 10, 15 years or so. It's just a natural part of, people waiting longer to have kids and start families are not doing them at all, and dogs become the surrogate children. And I guess in the same way, if you wouldn't leave your kid at home to hang out by himself, you now have to bring your dog everywhere with you. And I guess with children, you just have to stay there because you're not going to bring your kid to hang out with the bros, but you will bring your dog there, and you kind of have to accept it. And I guess they're not training their dogs very well because they're leaving the dog at home all day, and the dog, will misbehave if they're around other people. So that is that issue. There is the problem with dogs having to be everywhere, and that you having to tolerate dogs. Now, I love dogs. I'm not bothered by a dog, that with the exception of pit bulls, with the sole exception of pit bull. If I'm at a grocery store and a dog jumps up on me and is like looking for a pet, I'm not going to be upset. Generally not going to be upset unless it like tumbles something. I'm going to be happy and like, oh, hey, what's up, buddy? And I'm not upset by it. It's the same if a person's walking their dog and the dog approaches you. Some people get very upset about that, and I think you do have to accept that people are going to be upset about that, but I'm not one of those people. But at the same time, there are too many dogs, but it's going to be it's just a natural part of American society now and among people in their 20s and 30s. It is what it is. Probably not the best thing, but it's what we have. So now questions from Dollar Bill. Dollar Bill has 3 quick questions. He said, how did Colorado and New Mexico become strongholds for the Democrats in the Mountain West and Southwest, respectively? People talk about how Georgia shifted from red to purple, and Ohio and Florida went from purple to red states. But less has been said about how New Mexico and Colorado became blue. Well, New Mexico, I don't think it's ever been a majority white state. So demographically, it makes sense why it's blue. Now, the fact that Hispanics are moving more to Republicans is becoming a more competitive state. Republicans won it in 2004, but it's never been, in the 70s and 80s, it was a Republican state, but a lot of things have switched. New England used to be a Republican stronghold, okay? And so things have shifted over some of these voters at times that they would have been pro-Republican or voting Republican. Now they become more liberal. And I think with New Mexico, it's the demographic situation. As more Hispanics voted and they were solid Democratic voters, that state became more Democratic. Now that Hispanics are moving more towards Republican, it's becoming a more competitive state. Now, Colorado, it's totally due to white shit libs. They've had immigration too, but it's really due to the type of people that Colorado is attracting. I mean, Denver is one of the most left-wing cities in the country, and the people who are moving to Colorado, unlike the people who are moving to Texas or to Florida, are liberals. Conservatives, there is this self-selecting process of where people move and kind of a political balkanization that is happening where if you're conservative, you will move to Tennessee, Texas, Florida, some of the southeast states, even Idaho. But if you're liberal, you're going to be moving towards Colorado, or that they're attracting people from liberal industries like Colorado, North Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, Northern Virginia, absolutely. So that's just the type. They're attracting white shit libs, and those people are wanting to vote blue. And the city and the state has just become much more liberal, and how it advertises itself, and the people wanting to move there, and the industries that attract. It's just much more Democrat. So. That I think it's just who it's attracting and the people. With New Mexico, it was demographics, majority Hispanic. And with Colorado, it's just the type of whites, the type of middle class people who are moving there. They tend to be liberal as opposed to Texas and Florida. So, moving on to his second question. He wants me to have John Rocker on the show. For those who don't know, it's worth telling his story, which he relates. In 1999, he got in hot water when he declared his distaste at the prospect of playing for the Yankees or Mets by saying, "I'd retire first. It's the most hectic, nerve-wracking city. Imagine having to take the 7 train to the ballpark looking like you're riding through Beirut, next to some kid with purple hair, next to some queer with AIDS, right next to some dude who just got out of jail for the 4th time, right next to some 20-year-old mom with 4 kids. It's depressing. The biggest thing I don't like about New York are the foreigners. You can walk an entire block in Times Square and not hear anybody speaking English. Asians and Koreans and Vietnamese and Indians and Russians and Spanish people and everything up there. How the hell did they get in this country? More keyed than a locksmith, says Dollar Bill. He has recently resurfaced on Twitter and is still aggressively right wing as ever. I don't know what the two of you would talk about, but I'm sure it would be entertaining. Well, I do have John Rocker connections. I've met him. I had dinner with him like years ago, like 11 years ago. And I used to, when he wrote for WorldNet Daily, I would sometimes ghostwrite for him. And I also, one of the last times he was in the news is that he was one of the few celebrities who was willing to endorse Trump. And I called him on the phone to say, do you endorse Trump? And he endorsed Trump. And then a bunch of news outlets picked it up. I was like, wow, John Rocker, this shows how racist Trump is. This is early 2016. And I remember the New York Daily News had John Rocker's endorsement of Trump on the front page. New York Daily News, not New York Post. And it was like talking about how Republicans are the insane clown party. So it comes all for full circle with this. So I have connections to Rocker. I would have to make some connections. I don't really have many guests on here. If I do have a guest, it's like once in the blue moon, somebody I really know and can talk a lot about. But I do have that connection with John Rocker. I'm very pro John Rocker, and he was a big Trump fan in 2016 and still a Trump fan, so that's awesome. And we're glad to see him on Twitter. I probably won't have him on the show, but we do have a John Rocker connection. And so his third question, these are all simple questions. I do try to keep it to two for the regular episode, but if they're very quick questions, I can answer more. And so his third question is, what are your thoughts on trance music? Given that your musical tastes are black metal and opera, I don't trance music is your cup of tea, but both its creators and audience are very white, specifically European, with most DJs being Northern Euros like Dutchmen, Germans, and Brits. I think it's okay. I haven't really explored it that much, but occasionally I'll listen to trance playlists when I'm working and stuff and writing. So yeah, I'm pro it. We're pro trance music. I just don't know as much about it as I do about black metal, goth, or classical music. So, but yeah, no, I'm pro trance music. It's Greer head approved. It has the official Greer head seal of approval. And now moving on to New England Refugee. New England Refugee asks, hey Scott, are you excited for the college football playoff coming up this weekend? I think the Vols will unfortunately go down to Ohio State. No, they will not. They will beat Ohio State. I think Ohio State and a lot of these Big Ten teams are going to be demonstrating that they've played much weaker teams than the SEC, and the SEC will dominate the college football playoffs. So I think the Vols will do very well in the playoffs. Ohio State lost to a mediocre Michigan. And if they lose, they're going to definitely fire their head coach because he continues to lose to Michigan. So I don't really like the college football playoff, to be honest. I think it should have stayed at 4 teams. I don't like the 12-team framework. I think the fact that they now have playoffs is that a lot of these teams that should have be undefeated or just one loss slacked off in games, because there's a lot of people who just lost random games. Like Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois at home. And Tennessee's losses were not that good. I mean, they lost to Georgia, which that's something that they would have lost in regular season. But their teams have just been losing to random teams that they would have never lost to in years past. But I think it's just that teams are like, well, we can lose two games now. Every game doesn't matter as much. It's kind of like the NFL, and they slack off against weaker teams when they would have been preparing a lot more. So you would have the best 4 teams, but the playoff picture is just so messed up. I mean, and it's all for money. And also a lot of these kids don't want to even play in the playoffs because they're worried that they're going to get hurt and they're going to kill their draft prospects. So I actually prefer the older model of that they just had bowl games and there wasn't even a championship, and then just they voted on who was going to be the winner. Because that kept a lot of the traditions and rivalry. If the Rose Bowl was supposed to be the Big Ten versus the Pac-10, RIP Pac-10, Pac-12, and now the Big Ten is 20 teams. It's not even the Big Ten anymore. They're ruining people's math ability. And I like the more traditions and rivalries of that, but money came into play, and they're going to make so much money off the 12 playoff team, so the college football playoff. So it is what it is. But I'm rooting for the Vols. I think the Vols are going to do well. I think I'm not even going to might be driving all weekend, but when they're playing. But we're gonna be rooting for them. I'm excited for it. Hopefully the Vols do well. We're rooting for the Vols, and that's my team to pick it. I don't know if they will, but I know for sure Oregon is not going to win. If Oregon somehow wins it, like, it's time to end this system. It's like, where it's over. What is going on in college football playoffs? So that is my thoughts on that. Now going to some other questions. We're going to go to Mish House. Mish House wanted to make sure I got his questions. He has his first question. This is a great question. Can you educate the highly respected audience on how the Nazis were not socialists? To the degree that right-wing socialism is a real phenomenon, I feel this misconception shares at least considerable amount of blame. It depends on what you mean by socialism, because a lot of these guys are like, the state is involved in the economy. Well, we would technically be a socialist society now. We have a welfare state. We're able to impose tariffs. We also tax people to pay for infrastructure. I had a guy who was like saying Hamiltonian economics was socialism. Like, there was no fucking welfare state, and there was far less intervention in the economy than now. And just the fact that they were able to impose tariffs and raise funding for infrastructure projects, they're like, oh, this is socialism. It was absolutely not socialism. And the whole point of Hamiltonian system was to enshrine a kind of quasi-aristocracy over the country and let the elites rule and have much more authority over the country. I mean, he was much more skeptical of democracy. The idea of redistributing wealth from the best to the not so best would have been horrifying to Hamilton. It was against his very being. But with the Nazis, no. I mean, they had this rhetoric about utilizing socialism, and this was common in German at the time, because they realized, like, you're having to appeal to the people. Karl Lueger, who was the mayor of Vienna, he's the head of the Christian Social Party. He also would kind of utilize quasi-socialist rhetoric and some policies for them. I mean, they did support the welfare state, but they weren't having mass redistribution of wealth. Bankers and industrialists were pretty much on board with the Nazis. They were making a lot more money with the under Nazi regime than they were under Weimar. They were spending a lot of the economic wonders is that they were just spending a hell of a lot of money on military production. And also, a lot of their economy was jerry-rigged by a banker, Hjalmar Schacht, who was operating largely in capitalist positions, but he was doing some trickery and other things. You really should read Adam Tooze's book, The Wages of Destruction, to understand Nazi economic policy. It wasn't socialist. And it was relying on a lot of bankers and industrialists and standard economic thinkers to make the economy work. And it wasn't quite this socialist. I mean, there was even the thing, like, when people were confronted with the fact that they were labor unions were effectively banned. I mean, there was like a labor union, but it was completely under government control. And then they're like, well, they don't need labor unions now. they suppressed like organized labor under this. Also, the Nazis during the war were essentially enslaving other Europeans to come work in Germany for minimal pay and getting like 1,500 calories at most a day. And this was happening to French, Italians, Slavs, various other people. I mean, nobody wanted to work these jobs. They were really having to go up and round up people in France and Italy, and also from Soviet POWs. I mean, the Soviet POWs probably liked it more. It's like, well, I can starve in camp, or I can have a little bit more food working this. But it was essentially form of slave labor, and there's high mortality costs, and the French and Italians working were trying to run away. It was not a good situation. It's hard to say like, wow, they were really caring about the working man here. I mean, I guess the German working man, but it was not really quite a socialist system. It was still operating on capitalist principles. Yes, there was a lot more state intervention in it than traditional laissez-faire. They were trying to create more social benefits for workers. A lot of what they think is just like the totalitarian system of the Volksgemeinschaft that they were trying to have is like, we're all in this together, we're one people. And some people would like, well, that's socialism, but it's really not. I mean, private property was respected. There was not a mass redistribution of wealth. They did have social programs, but so do we. If you're going to say that they're truly a socialist state, then you could even argue that, America, since the New Deal, is a socialist state. So it's not really a good example of that. And they still, they're still free enterprise and national under National Socialism, which was not really free enterprise in the Warsaw Pact countries. I mean, some of these countries began having experiments in it near the end, but that was still the case in Germany. And most of the industrialists and bankers were happy with the new system because by the spending programs and some of Hjalmar jerry rigging, they were able to have a much more successful economy than they were under Weimar. So, and a lot of the kind of people that they're like, these are the true socialist thinkers who were operating in the party in the 30s and 20s, like Gottfried Feder, who had some just total crankery. They were pushed aside in favor of people with more standard economic ideas. Yeah, a lot more state interventionist. It certainly was not a libertarian society, far from it, but it was still a capitalist society. There were arguments going on within the regime over how much respect for private property and others, but as policy they totally respected. I mean, and they killed the socialists, the full-on socialists in the Night of the Long Knives too, who wanted dramatic social changes. So it's not their. That's some of the misconceptions that go along with it. Not that we're defending the Nazis, but. I have to issue. Have a full disavowal of the Nazis here. Just putting that clear. And I'm not saying we want to emulate it. I think the system that was, the slavery and plunder, I don't think you want to emulate that as they were operating in World War II. But it was not a socialist system. Or at least as people imagine it. So he has a second question of what's the Greerhead party line on drinking absinthe? I think it's fine. I wouldn't drink it, but we are not banning it. So if you're into that, that's fine. But it's not my thing. That is a quick question to that. We have a new follower, so I'm gonna end on this guy's question, and then everyone else we are going to save for the mailbag. So that is just keeping up. So we have one from Mr. Wass. He asks, Scott, with Christmas right around the corner, what are a couple of Christmas movies would you recommend to your listeners? The nihilist in me would say Black Christmas, but that is the scariest horror movie, so I would not recommend that watching with your family. I like Christmas Vacation. I like It's a Wonderful Life. I like the George C. Scott Scrooge, or a Christmas Carol, rather. Those are probably the Christmas Story. I've seen so many damn times that I don't like watching it. I've seen that 100, 200 times. I don't need to watch it again. I've already seen it enough. Christmas Vacation is always enjoyable to watch because it's like watching 80s suburban white America, and you really are being transported to a different time period. A kind of cozier time period. So I really enjoyed that about it. I think it's also funny. It's also very important to understand American culture and life, that if you're wanting to find a movie that's a good captures it. Not that it's very realistic movie, because it's very slapstick and people are getting injured and doing things that obviously would kill them in the movie, but they're just surviving. But the way people operate, it's a very important cultural touchstone. So I would find that. I hate Elf. I don't really like Will Ferrell movies. I find it really annoying. The kids ones, if you have kids around, like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is good. Little Drummer Boy is good. Yeah. So I would say that those are the ones. No, Die Hard is not a Christmas movie. You're not going to watch that with your kids around, okay? So that's the thing. So I would say Christmas Vacation, It's a Wonderful Life. There is definitely one I'm missing, but the George C. Scott Christmas Carol, I think those trio are about as good as you're going to get, and I support them. Actually the Home Alone movies I enjoy. Home Alone 1 and Home Alone 2. So rounding up to the top 5. That would be it. I'm probably forgetting some, but I'm going to stick to it. Absolutely. The one thing I would absolutely put on the list is not to watch is Elf. I find Elf extremely annoying. I don't like Elf. Sorry to be a Scrooge, but or the Grinch, but that is my answer to that. So that is all the questions today. If I did not answer your question, it will be for the mailbag. So I will tell you guys that later on if I have not yet already. So that is it for Highly Respected today. We've got more great content coming out in the future. But a note for next week. Next week is going to basically be a vacation week. We're still going to have content, but it's going to be different. We're probably not going to have a Highly Respected episode next week. What I'm probably going to do is we're going to have 2 mailbags next week. One mailbag will be free, unpaywalled. We'll post that on Monday. Second one will be paywalled. I think that will go up on Thursday, depending on articles, what's going on there. It could go up on Christmas Eve. We will probably have one article and we'll definitely have an IQ supplement, and we'll probably have an article. But I just want to know it's going to be a little bit different week. We're still going to have content, but we're probably the only recorded episode we're going to have is the IQ supplement at the end of the week. The following week for New Year's, we're going to be probably back on our normal schedule. And then after that, we'll be back to our normal schedule for the only thing that's going to happen is that January 20th, it is Martin Luther King Day, but it's also Trump's inauguration. We are not going to have an episode that day. So that is the only week where we're going to have a different schedule. We're going to be enjoying the return of Trump's America that day. So we're not going to have an episode, and, that's that. So, outside of that, we should have a normal schedule for, probably till Memorial Day. So you guys should be on the lookout for that. I don't think we don't take off President's Day here. We'll still have regular content going up. If something else comes up, I'll let you guys know. But next week, it's going to be a weirder schedule. So I'm going to try to have an article, but we'll definitely have 2 mailbags and an IQ supplement. So keep your eyes on that. So until next time, stay respected.